Hi and welcome to this tutorial showing you how to use the Apply Mask option in the Easy panel. Now I want to show you a couple of things. The first one is how to load your images as layers in Photoshop. We can do that just by going to File, Open and finding your exposures. You can load multiple exposures at the same time. And you'll often find that Adobe Camera Raw opens them up and you can see a dark exposure on the top here and a medium exposure at the bottom. Now we can just open up the images. And we'll see that our images have opened up in two different windows. Now, the way to actually transfer these in a 16-bit way, so it's not using any active selections, is just to grab this Move tool here in the top right-hand corner. And then we click on this exposure and we keep our left button down and we drag this image and we hover it over here. You see, when we hover it over this window title, the darker exposure becomes visible. And now I haven't taken my left finger off the mouse button and I'm dragging it to the center of this image. Now I hold down Shift and I let go of my left mouse button. And you'll see when I let go of Shift, the brighter exposure goes on top of the darker exposure and it's been centered in the image. Now if you want to do this in a different way, we can choose the brighter exposure here. We can press Command and A or Control and A. And you see we make this selection around the image. Then we press Command and C or Control and C. And we copy the image. Then we go to our darker exposure and we press Command and V or Control and V on a PC. And there you go, we copied it. Now I prefer the first way because that maintains a 16-bit image. But when you use active selections, the image becomes an 8-bit selection. But either way, we're going to work with the images we have in front of us now. So when we're blending two exposures, for example, I always put the base exposure at the bottom. I make the darker exposure invisible. Now the reason why we do that is too advanced for this video, but essentially we're creating a mask around this base exposure, not the dark exposure. Now, when we use the Apply Mask function, we can't have a mask on this layer that we have selected. So if we have a mask here like this, it won't work. We have to delete the mask. So please delete the mask. Then we have to make a selection. So we want to target the brightest parts of our image. So we're going to go to Bright, 16-bit bright. Then remember to use Apply Mask or Make Selection, we actually have to have a mask in front of us like this. Now I think I'm going to use the second Bright mask here. And that's because we have a decent selection of the sky and we're not affecting the foreground very much. When we choose a mask, we want there to be enough contrast between the brightest parts of our image and the darkest parts of our image. If everything's kind of grey like this, that means everything's going to be selected in the image to some degree. So I'm going to go for a more contrasting mask. Now all I need to do is press Apply Mask. And you see, we've quickly applied the mask to that dark exposure. And it looks great. It looks very natural and very clean. So that's before and after. We've basically taken the sky, the overexposed area in the base exposure, and we've replaced it with the beautiful sky from the darker exposure. And it only took a few steps. So with me not explaining what to do, let me show you how quickly we can do that. So I'm going to make the darker exposure invisible, choose my Brights masks, go to Brights 2 and choose Apply Mask. And that's it. That's actually quicker than using HDR software. Now, of course, some images are more difficult and some images are easier, but as you improve, exposure blending becomes much easier for you. Now, I'm going to show you how we can combine Apply Mask with an adjustment layer. So let's say I open up a curves layer and I want to add some contrast to my midtones. So I can bring up the highlights, bring down the shadows, making a fairly typical S-curve. But I only want it to affect my midtones, not my highlights. Well, I can delete the layer mask off the curves layer because remember we can't have a mask on a layer when we use Apply Mask. And I'm going to create my midtones masks. And now I can look at my midtones and let's go for midtones 3. And you can see we're selecting none of the highlights here and few of the shadows. And I'm going to choose Apply Mask. So now when I do the before and after, you see we've applied the mask to mainly the midtones. We're not darkening the shadows too much and we're not affecting the brighter parts of the sky. So if I disable the mask, That's what the contrast adjustment looked like before, and that's what it looked like after. And to give you another example on a levels layer, let's say we choose a levels layer here, we bring some contrast in, we make it a little bit darker, but we find that our shadows become a little bit too underexposed. Well, we can delete that layer mask just as before, open up the Easy panel, and this time go to our darks masks. And so I'm going to look through my darks mask and choose one which selects mainly the darks. And I think a darks 5 here works quite well. And I'm just going to press apply mask. So now, with this contrast adjustment, we're only affecting the shadows. But actually, if we press Command and I or Control and I, you'll see we've inverted the mask and we're only selecting the highlights. Now we could have actually created some bright masks, but I thought I'd just show you a different way of doing this. So that's before and after, and you see we don't have any underexposed areas. So if I disable the mask, that's what it looked like before the mask was applied, and that's what it looks like after the mask is applied. So that's how we can use apply mask to exposure blend and combine them with adjustment layers in the Easy panel.